So my question to you is like, give me an example of an experience you had with, let's say, a client that was a very good representation of this very conflict. Do you have that?
You know, the example I want to give you is actually one of the very first experiences I had in kind of my training as a professional cuddler. It wasn't even with a client. So one of the first things I did was I went to a cuddle party, which is an event where there's like a 45-minute intro of some rules and some basics basics of consent, things like that.
Yeah.
Really, really valuable space. And then there's this place where you can cuddle with other people.
Yeah.
Sometimes people sometimes you might cuddle with strangers, whatever, right? I think it's an amazing thing. They're really cool. And you can go there and say, I'm only going to cuddle with women. Any dude asks me to cuddle, I'm just going to say no. And that's fine, right?
Okay.
That's totally fine. You could just say, I'm not going to cuddle with anyone. Anyhow, during the intro, there's an exercise where you turn to the person next to you and you say, can I hold your hand?
Yeah.
Can I something? And they say, no.
Yeah.
And then they say, can I hold your hand? Or can I kiss you? They ask for something. And you say, no.
Uh-huh.
And let me tell you, the first time I did that, it was so incredibly hard for me to say no.
What do you mean?
I mean, this person, it happened to be a woman sitting next to me, looked at me and said, can I kiss you? And I said, no. Okay. And it was so difficult for me because I had never been given practice in saying no. And I was scared. I'd been taught to sacrifice. I'd been taught to make other people happy. I'd been taught to protect other people's comfort and not to really be honest in that way of saying, no, I don't want this.
And you think that's a reflection of you being a man or a reflection of what?
I do think it's actually in part, I think there's this dichotomy, right, where women need to learn how to say no very quickly in their lives because their boundaries are so frequently pushed on and ignored.
Got it.
But that's so often ignored when they say no that they learn they can say no, but it's not allowed, like it's not respected.
Okay.
Men, on the other hand, I think rarely have to actually say no in that same kind of way. And so we don't end up with practice doing that. And it's this thing that is difficult in kind of a different way. So a lot of conversations around consent talk about sort of this assumption that men need to get consent from women.
Okay.
And there's this other side where we don't as often include men in the conversation as people who need to have their consent respected or asked for before it's assumed.
You know what? That's so true because like I'll give you a scenario, right? Like this is kind of like left field, but very similar, right? Mm-hmm. So oftentimes like certain women will want to set me up with their friend, right? And it's a weird, I rarely accept those type of propositions. Here's why, right? Oftentimes they want to introduce me to their friend that I've never met. I haven't seen a picture of them. I haven't spoken to them, this, that, and the third. So now they put me in a position where they start describing their friend. Oh, she's wonderful. She's this, she's that, right? And then they show me a picture of her, right? See, isn't she gorgeous? Isn't she great, right? And in my mind, I'm like, this is not my person, right? Like, and I fight the urge of like saying, yeah, I reject this. I'm saying no to this person because a part of me is like, I'm going to hurt her and her friend's feelings because I don't know if her friend put her up to this. And I don't know how sensitive she is about how her friend is received to other people, right? So I'm just kind of like, I mean, like sometimes I'm like, I mean, we could all hang out. You know what I mean? You know, like,
absolutely.
You know, I mean, I've learned, I mean, as of late, I'm more like, listen, that's not what I'm into. Right. And then they'll say, why? What's the problem? Bah, 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 right. Or they'll say
Right.
like, are you just like, well, I've never heard anyone say like, are you just not into women? I've never heard anyone say that, but that's a concern. Like they might, because most men will be less rejective of women, right? I'm just highly selective and I'm hesitant when I say no, but I do say no. So I get it. You know what I mean? So
And,
yeah,
I mean, even that, this assumption that most men want a given thing. Most men don't want to reject women. I think that's even a silly thing that we've come to believe without a good reason, right? A lot of men I've talked to have been like not wanting too much attention, don't want a lot of sex, don't want a lot of like dates, whatever. But there is this assumption that they do. And so it's like we have trouble acknowledging that can happen. Like if I told you, hey, I heard a story last week where this woman sexually assaulted a man. What's your first thought? Right?
My first thought, believe it or not, which might be super biased, I'm thinking of a man who is a little bit adolescent. Right? That to me, that's the only way I can see a woman taking advantage of him. Right? And that's an unfair thought because that just means the only way a woman can take advantage of a man is if he's not matured to manhood yet.
Right.
See what I mean? So that's how my thought process goes. And it's a weird thing because I often, combat the idea that like physical and even sexual abuse only comes from men, right? And I'm always having like the debate, like, women could be, aggressors and abusers as well. But then just to your question, I had a conflicting thought when it came to my response, right?
Right. And so to me, that's actually that's a great illustration of is that we do have these biases. We do have these assumptions that we are taught and we have to unlearn them.
Right.
Right. So you and I are both in this position of saying, what's actually happening in my head?
Right.
Is that what I want to have happen? Is that what I really believe when I stop and think about it?
Yeah.
Or is it just a reflex? Is it just what I've been taught?
Yeah.
No,
I mean, that's fair. So, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, like, doing the work of professional cuddling, this is a really important part of it is when you come in for a session with me, I'm just going to say imagining you, Jeff, walking into a session with me, right? When you come in for a session with me, the most important thing I can offer you is a space where you can be comfortable.
Sure.
And because you're a human, you're a sensitive guy, not overly sensitive, but you're aware of the people around you, right? You don't want to hurt anybody's feelings.
Okay.
The best way and the only way I can help you to be comfortable is to make sure that I am totally comfortable. So I'm not doing anything that makes me uncomfortable. I'm not dishonest when I say, yes, this is fine. I'm not lying to you by saying, yeah, let's lie down and cuddle. I have to make sure that if there's something I don't want, I'm completely honest and saying, no, I don't want to do that. We have to do something different. So the essence of the work of professional cuddling is really maintaining boundaries in a very, very like gentle, nuanced, precise, and subtle way.
Okay.
That helps everybody be comfortable.
So what are boundaries for you as a professional cuddler?
There are simple ones, right? Like I'm ticklish in not a fun way. I do not like being tickled.
Wait, what? What? How?
So if I get tickled, I react really badly to it. I really don't like it, and like I have like the impulse to like make it stop as fast as possible, right? So
safe word.
Well, that or like, but it even goes below that. Like I'll want to get physical, like push someone off or hit someone to stop.
Oh, wow.
But I don't feel like I can do that. So instead I get frozen and it becomes a really helpless, uncomfortable thing for me.
Okay.
Right. And I think this was because people would like hold me down and tickle me when I was a kid and I would want them to stop and they wouldn't stop.
Yeah.
And so it became a moment where I was very helpless and powerless.
Got it.
And helplessness is really a big, huge part of trauma. What makes something really unpleasant for us in the future is that feeling of helplessness.
Got it.
So that's a simple thing, right? Somebody wants to tickle me, and I'll tell this to new clients. Hey, I don't like being tickled. If your hand is on my side, I might ask you to move it. Not because there's something wrong with that in general, but at that moment, it felt like tickling to me.
Okay.
I don't want your hands between my waist and my mid-thigh, right? So kind of a slightly broader, like anywhere that boxers would cover, pretty much.
Got it.
Right?
Got it.
And different people have different physical boundaries, and the reason for that boundary for me is that's an area that feels sexual to have somebody's hands touching me there. And so that doesn't belong in a cuddle session. And I would not want to touch a client in that area or anywhere a two-piece bathing suit would cover if they're a client who has, breasts.
So what happens in situations where you're cuddling a client and you get aroused?
Nothing. What do you mean?
No, meaning does that make the experience more difficult for you? Is that because a boundary was crossed, or is that completely normal?
It's totally normal.
Really? And do your clients ever respond in any particular way when that happens?
So when I say it's totally normal, it doesn't happen to me frequently, but it's generally normal for bodies to do that.
Sure.
Right? So when that has happened to me, I don't remember having gotten comment on it or having the client have a reaction to it. But I made a video a while back, and I don't think I currently have it available to search, but it was, what do you do if someone gets an erection during a cuddle session? You can ignore it. You can say, hey, can we adjust, right? Can we do something a little different?
Okay.
If you don't want a boner poking you in the leg or the back or whatever, and just move. It's that simple.
That is wild to me.
Right?
It's wild to me in the sense because and I've said this before, when you're doing professional cuddling or when you're cuddling someone, even if the intent is supposedly very plutonic, but the mechanisms that make it romantic are often the same. You see what I'm saying? So you might mentally,
To clarify what you're saying, you're saying usually we associate physical closeness and cuddling with romance, and so those things can look and feel the same to some people.
It's not even what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm saying if you want it to be romantic, the gestures aren't necessarily that different at the entry point.
Gotcha.
You see what I'm saying? So your body responds to that romantically just as much as it does platonically. You see what I'm saying? So in other words, if you want here's what I mean. If you want to be close to someone platonically, you can hug them, right? Mm-hmm. You can hug them, you can embrace them, right? You might caress them in whatever way you feel is appropriate between the two of you. Guess what? If you want to be close to someone romantically, you can hug them, you can caress them, right? Similar gestures. So your body, your cells, every organ in your body doesn't know, other than your mind, right? And even if your mind puts a boundary, your body might respond to things, especially if you have erogenous zones that aren't necessarily the typical.
Yes, totally fair.
You see what I mean?
I do.
Right.
I'm glad you clarified that because, I get you.
So when that happens, would that shift the mindset of the client? Has there ever been a client that wanted to take it further than just cuddling?
So there's this thing that happens in professional cuddling.
Okay.
That I don't know how well I'm going to describe it, but bear with me. And it comes from the fact that sex work is stigmatized and illegal in our country, in our culture.
Okay.
And so there's this idea of seeking out sex work as shameful. Even for sometimes for men, wanting sex work or wanting sex can be shameful.
Yeah.
So sometimes men will come to professional cuddlers and they want care, intimacy, affection, but they also have a desire that maybe they aren't even aware of for sex or for sex work. And they're not admitting that. They're in denial about that. Right?
Okay.
And so it's this weird limbo of like, yeah, I want this, but I'm pretending I don't. And they're not just saying to the cuddler, no, like, yes, I'm good with a platonic service, and kind of deceiving the cuddler. They're really deceiving themselves.
Okay.
And sometimes there will be people who will come and actively deceive the cuddlers, right? But again, because they want a service that is not widely available and really should be. So I had a client who came, and in the screening process, because we pretty much all have a screening process that we go through.
Right, makes sense.
I was already not totally, this is a great client. Right?
You weren't sold.
I wasn't sold. I was a little hesitant, but I went ahead.
Okay.
And this is a great example of a boundary my own boundary that I crossed.
Okay.
Because I said, yes, I'm going to go ahead and see you. The reason was because I wanted the income from that session.
Sure.
And that's actually me crossing the boundary of saying, I don't want to work with this person, but I'm going to ignore my own boundary for the sake of making a little money.
And what were the clues that said you shouldn't work with this client?
The way that he responded when I asked him things.
Like?
I don't remember the exact questions I used at the time, but his responses did not say to me, I want to be here talking to you and making it clear that I am a good client for you. He wanted to get past that part and get to the next thing. He just wanted to get through it, get it done with.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you asked me, you were like, Corwin, you want to be on my podcast? Like, yeah, sure. And you were like, great, we're going to have a phone call. And I was like, all right. And then as soon as we got on the phone, I was like, yeah, whatever, man. Let's just get on the podcast. Let's just start recording.
Yeah. Okay.
That would feel weird to you, right? You'd be like, maybe I don't want to have you on my podcast.
Yeah. And I've had that.
Right. Yeah. And in this case, you're on the, like, you can just stop the call and you can just hit end. You can cut it off. You can not release the podcast, whatever. So it's more okay to be like, we'll see what happens. In that case, this is a person I'm cuddling with. Their whole body is next to me, right? And so what happened was during the session, there was the way, so there's like, sometimes when you're cuddling, you're still, sometimes you move a little bit, right? Okay. You adjust, there's this, there's that. What he was doing was more like, just a little bit like dry humping.
Oh.
And then it moved more towards that. And I felt a little stuck, a little frozen, right? And I didn't know how to respond. And my sort of, the rule is, if it feels sexual, it doesn't belong in a cuddle session.
And is that subjective?
100% subjective.
Right. Okay.
And that's the thing about it, is there's no objective way to say, is this sexual? It's, does this feel sexual
to you? And
this was my problem. In that session, I went with, does it feel sexual to him? And I asked him, I said, does this feel sexual to you?
Oh, you did?
And he did not say to me, no, it doesn't. He said to me, no.
He said, nope. That is those are the words of a guilty man.
Exactly. But because he said no, I didn't give myself a further option to say, doesn't feel good to me. We need to change something.
And so what happened?
So that stopped. We kept cuddling. Then it kind of slowly started back up again a little bit later.
Yeah.
And then the end of the session timer went off. In that case, I was kind of saved by the bell. Right. But the thing that what I think happened with that client was he wanted sex, he wanted affection. I think that he was not comfortable being attracted to a man. I think he was in denial about that part of it.
Really?
And oh yeah, he did not show up as a person who looked comfortably gay.
What does comfortably gay look like? Because that's subjective.
That is subjective. That's very subjective. And yet, if you walk down the streets in New York, sometimes you're like, oh, that's a person who wants everyone to know that they're queer or that he's gay, right? He showed up more so in a way that I associate with heterosexual men who don't want to look gay.
I don't even know where to begin with like classifying what categories a particular look looks like. You know what I mean? But I'll go by your word. But with that said, did you have a conversation with the person to like clarify what their intent was after the fact to see?
No.
Okay.